Has, in a single moment, someone ever decided your worth based on the color of your skin, the way you look, or the way you walk to a door? At the Chicago airport that morning, a black woman was stopped by the pilot at the door of the plane. No screaming, no chaos, just a cold sentence: "I don't like the way you look." But little did he know, the woman he was trying to push back was the new CEO of the airline he worked for. The mistake didn't just ruin a flight, it opened a confrontation between old culture and justice. If it were you, if you were standing in front of a door being rejected just because of the color of your skin, would you silently step back? Or would you stand tall, holding your dignity? This story is not just about discrimination, it is about choices. Choose silence, or choose change. Join us on the emotional journey of Camille Hart, the woman who stood up and changed an airline. If this story touches you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can spread stories of healing power together. There is a distinct atmosphere in the morning at Chicago Midway Airport, a kind of noise as if the whole of America is jostling to get to work, to meetings, to find their own lives. The sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the floor, children calling for their mothers, the loudspeakers are crackling with age. The smell of diluted coffee from the small counter in the left corner mixes with the smell of damp towels from recently landed flights. A very normal day at Midway. But that morning, there was something unusual standing right in front of the boarding gate at Gate C27. A black woman in a neat navy suit, holding an electronic ticket that lit up on the phone screen. Her face was not heavily made up, just a very light layer of powder. Her hair was tied low at the nape of her neck. She stood straight and calm, and the mature, sharp beauty of a woman in her 40s. Her name is Camille Hart. She stood there, but couldn't take another step, because right in front of her, a strong hand wearing black pilot gloves was raised, blocking her way. "Ma'am, this flight is full, and it definitely don't belong in the premium cabin." The man's voice was hoarse and condescending, not avoiding her gaze. The speaker was Captain Reddick, captain of North Star Flight 278 from Chicago to Seattle. At that moment, the line of people behind Camille stopped for a moment. There were a few curious glances, there were a few shy glances, and a few phones, still pretending to check email, were suddenly lowered to a corner to secretly film. Camille didn't react immediately. She wasn't the type to jump in surprise or to snap back with a sharp retort. No. She stood still. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. A deep, deep breath. Looking into Reddick's eyes, Camille saw what she had seen so many times in her life. Judgment. Prejudice. The self-righteousness to determine someone else's worth. She was used to those looks, but used to them didn't mean they didn't hurt. "Sir," Camille said in a soft but clear voice, "my ticket is for business class. I am just boarding the plane like any other passenger." Reddick smiled slightly, a half smile that was full of arrogance. "Business class isn't community seating. Not everyone can just walk in." That sentence doesn't need to be said clearly. Everyone understands the meaning. A woman of color, dressed simply, alone, no designer handbag, not the successful businesswoman he imagined. Reddick looked at Camille as if she were trying to take someone's place. Camille kept her cool. She had learned to stay cool after years of living in a society where people sometimes judged you based on the color of your skin. She held her phone up to the scanner. "My ticket is valid. Please do not interfere." But Reddick didn't back down. He actually took a half step forward, as if to block her with his entire body. "Ma'am, I'm the captain. I have the final authority on this aircraft. And I'm telling you, step aside." The entire gate area seemed to sink. The loudspeaker announcement from the gate next door became vague and distant. Camille knew this type of person well. The type of person who believed that professional power meant the right to judge people. The type of person who used the word safety as a shield to conceal prejudice. Something pricked in Camille's heart. An old wound. No longer bleeding, but never unfeeling. She remembered the first time she was stopped by a security guard at a store because she looked suspicious. She remembered the time a male colleague told her a black woman can't run the engineering department. She remembered her first meeting at a large company where she was assumed to be an assistant. That pain did not weaken her. It shaped her into the woman who stands here today, but it still hurts. Camille didn't want to make a big deal out of it. She just wanted to get on the plane, sit down in seat 2A, open her laptop, and get on with the plan to revamp North Star Airlines that she had been working on for so long. But Reddick took things too far. Behind her, the gate agent, Emma Walsh, stood frozen. Her hands were still shaking. She managed to mumble, "Captain, your boarding pass is valid." But Reddick shouted Emma, "Do your job. Call security." Camille heard that and understood immediately. If she backed down, if she bowed her head, she would be allowing yet another abuser of power to trample over her dignity, and the dignity of those like her. No. Camille Hart is no longer the little girl who stood crying in front of the supermarket. She raised her head and straightened her back. "You want me to step aside?" "Fine, but before that, explain your reasons and tell everyone present." Reddick frowned. Camille continued, her voice low, but resonant. "Why do you think I am not worthy to enter the business cabin?" A few people behind me nodded slightly. Someone whispered, "Yeah, that's fair." Camille's question was like a ray of light cutting through the darkness. A vein in Reddick's neck throbbed. He had not expected a soft-spoken woman of color to ask such a direct question. The feeling of being uncomfortable, challenged, and touched made him blush. "Because." Reddick gritted his teeth. "You don't fit the profile." The sentence was like an invisible slap. Emma choked. An elderly passenger shook his head and sighed. Camille pursed her lips. Two conflicting emotions were struggling inside her. On one side is the Camille who has endured her whole life and wants to keep quiet and let it go. On the other side is the Camille, the new CEO of North Star Airlines, who will not allow that to exist for even a moment. In the end, the second part won. Camille did not retreat a step. She looked straight at Reddick and said, "He just made the biggest mistake of his career. Right here. No shouting, no anger, but sharp as a thin blade." A silence fell over Gate C27 so long that one could hear the distant sound of suitcase wheels. And that was just the beginning. When Captain Reddick stood in front of Camille at Gate C27, he had no idea that the woman he had insulted was at the center of a much larger change. But to understand how significant that moment was, we need to step back a day, just a day, to see the journey that brought Camille to a place that very few people of color have ever reached in American aviation. The previous morning, at North Star Airlines headquarters in Dallas. The board meeting ended in a momentous silence. Not the tense kind, but the kind that marks a new chapter. Camille Hart was appointed as the 14th CEO of North Star Airlines, and the first black woman in the airline's history to hold the position. She stood on the roof of a tall glass building, the cool Texas wind blowing through her hair. Below were planes with the North Star logo basking in the morning sun. An indescribable feeling crept into her heart. Happiness, yes. Pride, yes. But above all, responsibility. North Star didn't just pick a new CEO. They picked a healer for a tired system. Before standing here, Camille lived a challenging life. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, in a neighborhood where kids played basketball on cracked brick courts, and chalk marks on old walls were the remains of accidental bullets. Her mother, Diane Hart, was a night nurse. Her father, Raymond, was a long-haul truck driver. Both worked long hours just to make sure Camille got to school every day. Camille clearly remembers the smell of her mother's blouse every time she hugged her after her shift. The smell of antiseptic, the smell of fatigue, but also the smell of love. When she was little, Camille used to ask her mother, "Why are you so nice to everyone?" "No one is nice to you." Mom just smiled. "No need for anyone to be nice first. Just be nice first." "My child." Such sayings, simple yet profound, followed Camille throughout her life. Camille has been fascinated with airplanes since she was a child. Every time a plane flew over Atlanta, she would run out into the yard and look up like a child looking at a miracle. Her father used to tease her. "We don't have money to fly." "Son, I'm the only one who drives a truck." Camille smiled and shook her head. Not to fly, Dad, but I want to know who runs the whole world up there. The father hugged his daughter. His face darkened by the long sun flashed a proud smile. Maybe it was you, Camille. Camille never forgot those words. But the road to the dream is not straight. When Camille was 17, she was stopped by a supermarket security guard and accused of concealing something she hadn't done anything about. It was all because she was black and standing near the expensive cosmetics section. She remembers the way people looked at her suspicious, judgmental, accusing. She cried all the way home from the supermarket. Her mother just held her in her arms without saying a word. But the next morning, her mother put her hand on Camille's shoulder and said softly, "You'll have more of these things happen to you. But you have to be stronger than the people who hurt you, and don't let them define who you are." That day, Camille decided that if she could enter places of power, where people of color were always doubted, always looked down upon, she would enter with all her might. After earning a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, Camille worked in logistics, then moved into airport operations management. She was the first person in her old company to propose a 30% reduction in flight delays by restructuring maintenance procedures. She never yelled, never used her authority to bully anyone. She simply asked, "How can we make it better for everyone?" That's what makes her stand out. Gradually, Camille became a household name in the aviation industry. And then North Star came to her as a last hope. On the day he was appointed CEO, Mark Ellison, chairman of the board, said something that Camille took to heart. "I didn't hire you because you're a black woman. I hired you because you're better than anyone else." Camille replied, "I will do my best, not to prove that I am worthy, why, but so that other people of color do not have to prove it every day." Mark looked at her, nodding respectfully. After her appointment, Camille held no party. She didn't want flashbulbs or fawning handshakes. She sat alone in her new office, a large, glass-walled room overlooking the runway. The afternoon sunlight shone on the North Star model airplane on the table. Camille flipped open a thick file customer complaints, quarter 3, mostly complaints about service, crew attitudes, delays, and a few issues of discrimination. Camille squeezed her fingers. We need to see it with our own eyes, not through a report, not through a presentation. The thought came naturally, a decision made on the spur of intuition, something Camille had always trusted. She took out her laptop and booked business class on North Star Flight 278, Chicago to Seattle. No secretarial help, no internal priority code, no pseudonym. Oh, Camille writes her name. Normally Camille Hart. She wanted to be treated like every other passenger to see the naked truth. That night, Camille packed a small suitcase, just a few clothes, a leather-bound notebook, and the fountain pen her father had given her when she graduated from college. Before going to sleep, Camille opened an old message from her mother. It was a very short sentence. Remember to take care of yourself wherever you go. The strongest person is the one who knows how to treat others with kindness. She smiled slightly. The next morning at Chicago Midway, Camille didn't look like a CEO when she walked into the airport. No assistant following her, no privileges. Just a black woman in a blue suit, carrying a small suitcase, blending into the flowing crowd. She sat drinking coffee, looking at the tired passengers, looking at the gate staff being scolded by customers, looking at a few pilots standing in a corner with their arms crossed as if the whole world revolved around them. Camille silently wrote each thing down in her notebook. And then, a few dozen minutes later, she stood in front of Gate C27, business class ticket in hand. Stepped up, nodded to Emma Walsh. The gate agent was trying to smile because she was tired. But after only 3 steps, Camille was stopped by Captain Reddick. "Ma'am, this flight is full." Looking at his cold face, Camille understood that her anonymous inspection trip would not be anonymous for much longer. It seems, Camille thought to herself, my reformation is starting sooner than expected. And in that moment, the moment Reddick's hand reached out to block it, Camille felt something clear in her heart. It's no coincidence that I'm here today. If you walked into Gate C27 that morning and didn't know anything about North Star Airlines, you would have no trouble figuring out that the airline had a problem. Not the kind that could be solved with a few new billboards or a few fancy words at a press conference, but the kind that lay at the heart of the system culture, people, and respect. From a distance, Camille saw the slight commotion that only a seasoned practitioner could sense. There was no shouting or loud arguing, just small details, but enough to tell the true state of affairs. The ticket scanner at the gate was flashing red like a broken warning light. A suitcase had fallen right next to the row of seats, and no one bothered to pick it up. The loudspeaker announcement was distorted and mixed with background noise, making passengers strain to hear. A little girl was crying because she lost her teddy bear. Her mother was both comforting her and annoyed because the flight was delayed by more than an hour. Right in the left corner, the vending machine was jammed, the water inside was all over the place, and no one had time to fix it. These are signs of a tired system. Camille slowed down, looking more closely. She loved to look at details like this. She had always believed that great things could come from small things. Just outside the boarding gate, gate agent Emma Walsh tried to smile at passengers, but her sleep-deprived eyes betrayed her. She was clearly new, or at least untrained, to the pressures of the travel season. Camille saw Emma struggling like someone trying to swim in a raging current. She felt more pity than blame. This is where I have to start, she thought to herself. Next to Emma was an older man, probably a veteran, but he looked like he had given up on everything. He leaned against the computer stand, nonchalantly pressing the delay button in a monotone voice that almost made Camille fall asleep. It wasn't that he was irresponsible, it was that he was so tired that he had no emotion left. And it was in the middle of all that commotion that Captain Reddick appeared. He did not walk hurriedly, nor did he run. He walked as if he were the main character on the stage, and everyone else was just supporting actors. Reddick spoke to a young pilot standing next to him, patting him on the shoulder as if to say, "Listen to me. Camille heard a few words I told you. You have to be firm. If you let passengers push you, you will lose control. This job is not about pleasing them. It is about controlling them." The young pilot nodded but looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Camille stood at a distance, watching the scene. She didn't know his name then, but she would learn it later. His name was Daniel Young, and he would play an important role in her journey. Reddick walked toward the gate, scanning the area with a searching eye, not to help Emma or the passengers, but to make himself known. There was something cold in his eyes, not a professional cold, but a cold that came from being accustomed to power, a power that no one dared challenge. Emma tried to bow, but Reddick just glanced at her and waved his hand, as if to shoo away a pesky mosquito. It was a moment that made Camille feel a pang in her heart. She had been Emma once young, trying to do well, but always being diminished by people like Reddick. Camille notes in her notebook the gate staff under pressure. Pilot gate cooperation very poor. Culture fear-based. She wrote quickly, concisely, and without emotion. But beneath that coldness was real pain. A middle-aged passenger approached the counter and asked Emma about the status of his flight. His voice was a little high, not because he was annoyed, but because he was worried about an important meeting in Seattle. Emma explained softly, trying to stay calm, but before she could finish, Reddick interrupted. The delay is due to operational issues. We will board when I say it's safe. The customer stopped. Emma blushed. Camille squeezed the pen lightly in her hand. She saw an image of a system turned upside down. The people who should be respected, the frontline workers, are being overlooked. The people responsible for support, the flight crew, are putting pressure on them. It's not the fault of an individual. It's the fault of the culture. Camille continued flight deck arrogance. No support for frontline staff? Leadership failure? As time went on, the atmosphere at Gate C27 became increasingly tense. Passengers and staff alike were affected by invisible forces fatigue, waiting, and a sense of no one being in control. Camille stepped closer. She wanted to get a better look at how the staff interacted with the pilots and passengers. Then she saw a sight that made her stop completely. Emma was trying to explain to the elderly passenger when suddenly Captain Reddick walked up and growled right next to her. Emma, I told you to check the passengers. Why do they keep asking? Emma was startled, almost dropping the passenger list. Camille saw fear in Emma's eyes. Not fear of being fined or losing her job, but fear of being humiliated in front of others. She wrote staff morale extremely low, fear of authority, toxic chain of command. At that moment, Camille understood that today's flight was more than just a test flight. It was a slice of the entire problem North Star was facing. She adjusted her suit collar and took a deep breath. Her decision to board the plane as a regular passenger felt even more right. Because if she hadn't played the role of a passenger, she would never have seen the truth so clearly exposed. When boarding began, Camille waited in line. A few passengers in front of her grumbled at the delay but remained patient. The smell of weak coffee from someone's newly purchased cup mingled with the scent of new suitcases and cheap tourist perfume. Camille observed every detail: the flashing light of the scanner, the sound of the little girl stopping to cry after finding her teddy bear, Emma softly apologizing to the passengers, Reddick clearing his throat repeatedly as if to remind them of his presence. When there was only one person left before her turn, Camille saw Emma sigh. A sigh that made Camille want to go over and put a hand on the girl's shoulder and say, "You're doing great." But Camille didn't. She stayed in her role the passenger so she could see the reality clearly. Emma scanned the ticket for the person in front of her. A small beep sounded. Then it was Camille's turn to step up. She gave the ticket, smiling slightly. "Good morning." Emma was about to smile back when Captain Reddick's large hand shot out and blocked Camille's chest. The whole world stood still. In that moment, it became clear to Camille it wasn't just this flight that was in trouble. The entire North Star Airlines was demanding that she start the overhaul right here. Right now, right in front of everyone. The silence in Gate C27 was deafening as Captain Reddick's hand shot out, blatantly blocking Camille's path. Not by accident, not by mistake, but the action of a man accustomed to giving orders and accustomed to being left unchallenged. Camille paused, her eyes never leaving his face. No avoidance, no fear. Just a look so calm it was incomprehensible. Emma Walsh stood nearby, still holding her boarding pass. She felt caught between two opposing forces: the authority of the flight crew and the kindness of a passenger she barely knew. Emma let out a shaky breath. "Captain, her ticket is valid." I scanned. Reddick didn't let her finish. He turned, lifted his chin, and said in a powerful, low voice, "Emma." Well, I said, "Step back." "Emma," I said. Emma immediately bowed her head, her hands clasped together, her lips trembling with fear. No one around her spoke, not because they agreed, but because they were afraid. Camille looked at the scene with a pang in her heart. The pain was not because she had been offended. It was because she saw herself from years ago in Emma, a young person, a person trying to do good, but being oppressed by someone who thinks power gives them the right to bully others. Camille took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "Sir, my ticket is business class. Please let me board the plane." Reddick laughed, a short, vicious laugh, like someone saying, "Don't mess with me," without saying it. "Ma'am, I don't care what your ticket says. I decide who gets on the plane." "And I'm saying no." A man standing behind Camille blurted out, "Come on, man, let her board." Reddick spun around, his eyes blazing. The man looked down, and Camille remained standing, not taking a single step back. She asked in a steady voice, "So what is the reason?" Reddick narrowed his eyes. Camille could sense he was looking for an excuse, a reason that sounded safe, professional, routine, but was really just a facade. Finally, he said, "We've had fraud attempts in the premium cabin lately. You don't fit the profile." The whole sentence was like a needle piercing the air, causing everyone to be silent. A white woman standing near Camille whispered, "What profile? She looks just fine." But she stopped when she saw Reddick's eyes dart over. Camille heard every word, so clearly it sounded like metal on metal. does not match the profile, she knew exactly what it meant. It means your skin is too dark. It means you don't look like someone with money. It means I don't think you belong here. The feeling was familiar to Camille. It was like the years she'd gone to interviews and been mistaken for a barista. Like the time she'd been selected to lead a project and was asked, "Who's the real leader?" Like the time she'd been stopped in a store when she was 17. That humiliation, even though Camille had become CEO, was enough to make someone's heart ache. Camille swallowed, very slowly. She needed to stay calm. Anger only made men like Reddick stronger. She spoke softly, but each word was as clear as the sound of metal tapping on glass. "You are judging me based on the color of my skin." Reddick interrupted immediately. "Adam, don't bring skin color into this. This is a security issue." A man standing nearby chuckled. "Yeah, right. Security." Reddick turned back, growling. "Who said that?" The man immediately fell silent. Camille looked around. Passengers' eyes confused, annoyed. Angry flipped across her face. A few phones were held higher. Rotating lights flickered like fireflies in the daytime. Today, Camille was not just the one who had been wronged. She was a reflection of all those who had been wronged. She felt the weight of that responsibility on her chest, straightening her back. She said, "I did nothing wrong. If you think my ticket is fake, please check with the system." Emma tried to look up, trembling. "Her ticket is completely valid." "Captain." Reddick shouted so loudly that some passengers were startled. "Emma, one more word and I'll file you for insubordination." Emma's face was pale. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't dare to breathe heavily. Camille felt a weight on her heart when she saw it. She thought of her mother, of the night shifts, of the insults her mother endured because of the color of her skin. But her mother never lost her kindness, Camille wondered. If my mother were here, how would she want me to behave? The answer came clear. Mother would want her to stand tall, not to stoop, not to be humiliated, but also not to step on anyone, not to shout, not to threaten. Just say it right, and tell the truth. Camille raised her head. Her eyes calmed to the point of coldness. "Sir, I followed all the rules. I was polite. I didn't cause trouble. I was just standing here, waiting to be scanned like everyone else. And you're stopping me because you think I'm not good enough." A person behind softly said, "She's right." Camille continued, her voice low but resonant. "Then I ask you to make it clear in front of everyone here why I am not allowed on the plane." Reddick had never been challenged like this, especially by a woman of color, and especially in front of passengers. He faltered for half a second, just half a second, but long enough for Camille to see. His eyes flashed with the anger of a man losing control. Finally, he said, "Because you're making me uncomfortable. And an uncomfortable passenger is a safety concern." The entire gate, C27, exploded with whispers. A woman said loudly, "What, she's just standing there." The man was upset. "Don't play the safety card, man." Camille felt a wave of anger rising around her. Not because of her, but because they had seen too many of these abuses. She looked straight at Reddick. It wasn't an angry look, just deep and sad. Sad for a system that had allowed people like him to survive for so long. "You want to call security?" Camille asked softly. "Yes, and I will." Camille nodded slightly. A smile appeared, very light, very calm. "Then, call." And in that moment, Reddick had no idea he had just placed his hand on the knife that would cut short his own career. Just seconds after Captain Reddick said the word security, Emma Walsh shakily reached for her walkie-talkie. She tried to speak clearly, but her voice was broken. "Gate C27, request security assistance." The whole area fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to Camille. Not doubt, but anger, sadness, even shame. Camille stood still. The ticket was still in her hand. She neither advanced nor retreated. She just took a deep breath, a long breath as if to gather all the remaining calmness in her body. Less than a minute later, Two airport security officers emerged from the hallway, a large man in his 40s and a younger woman, her eyes quick and sharp. The man asked immediately, his voice even and professional. What seems to be the issue here? Reddick seized the opportunity like a man who had just seen an outlet for his ego. He took a step forward, pointing at Camille. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions. She's being disruptive, and I believe her ticket may be fraudulent. A hiss came from the back row. A woman exclaimed softly, but clearly that's not true. She didn't do anything. The security man turned to Camille, his eyes unprejudiced, only filled with the weariness of someone who had handled too many similar cases. Ma'am, can we see your ID and your ticket? Please, Camille gently handed them both. The security woman checked the portable system. It took exactly 7 seconds. She said, "Ticket valid? Name matches? No flags." Reddick growled. "Check again." The security woman raised her head. Her voice became stiff. "Everything matches, sir." The air fell silent again. Camille looked at Emma. The young girl was trying to hold back tears. She bowed her head as if to apologize to Camille, but did not have the courage to look up. That moment stabbed Camille's heart more than the insult. Camille said softly to the security I was just standing there, waiting to be scanned. I wasn't causing trouble. I wasn't arguing. I just wanted to know why I was stopped. The security man nodded, then turned to Reddick Captain. Her documents are valid. What's the actual safety concern? The air suddenly became thick. Reddick frowned, as if cornered. He finally said what Camille knew he would say. Her behavior is unpredictable. A man in line burst out laughing. Unpredictable. She hasn't even moved. Another shook his head, saying louder, "This is ridiculous." Reddick shot them a dagger-like look, but this time no one ducked. The truth began to tilt in Camille's favor. But at that moment, a flash of an image made Camille choke. A memory like a thin layer of dust rose up for a brief moment. Camille was 17. The supermarket was on the corner. The guard stopped her because she was standing too long in the cosmetics section. He said, "You look suspicious." Just 3 words, but it's enough to suffocate one's youth. Camille cried then. Cried because of humiliation. Cried because she felt like a criminal, even though she had done nothing wrong. Camille was no longer crying, but the feeling the small, cold needle piercing her dignity was still there, burning like a wound that would never fully heal. It brought back something she thought she had gotten over, the feeling of having to prove her worth to people who didn't want to believe. The security man looked at Camille, then at Reddick. He said bluntly, "Sir, without a clear safety concern, we cannot remove her." Outside, a few passengers clapped lightly. Camille remained calm, but inside she was a mixture of sadness and fatigue. She didn't want to win or lose, and she didn't want to argue. She just wanted to be treated like a human being, the smallest thing. But the hardest thing right now? She turned to Reddick, her voice low but not trembling, so I need you to be clear. Why can't I get on the plane? Reddick looked at Camille as if to rip her mask of calm away. Finally, he said in a small but audible voice, "Because I don't like your attitude." The whispers spread like waves. An elderly man stood up and spoke clearly. "This is discrimination. Everyone here sees it." The woman next to Camille whispered, "Stay strong, honey." The security guard took a deep breath and turned to Reddick, "Sir, if there is no legal basis, you can't deny boarding." In that moment, Camille saw something in Reddick's eyes, not logic, not expertise, but ego. An ego that panics when challenged. An ego that refuses to be defeated by a colored passenger. Camille looked at him, her heart sinking. "You are not worth my anger," she said, her voice so low that only Emma could hear. "If I back down today, someone else will take my place tomorrow." And for Camille, that was unacceptable. Reddick turned to Emma, his voice sharp as a knife. "Emma, call airport police." Emma trembled, her hand about to press the button, when Camille gently placed her hand on the edge of the counter. Not touching Emma, just enough of a gesture to make the girl stop. Camille said, her voice as light as a breath but as loud as a bell. Emma, you don't need to do that. For the first time all morning. Emma looked up at Camille, the uncertain gaze of someone caught between conscience and fear. I don't know what to do. Camille looked deep into her eyes, speaking in the voice of someone who had stood in that exact position. Do the right thing. Emma burst into tears. She put down the radio. The whole area was silent. Camille turned to Reddick and said the words that changed everything forever. You just insulted me in front of dozens of witnesses, and you will be held responsible for it. Reddick jerked his shoulder as if he had touched an electric wire. Who do you think you are? Camille looked at him a long time. Her eyes were no longer sad, no longer hurt. Only perseverance remains. She replied softly, You will know very soon. At that moment, the entire gate, C27 seemed to be preparing to witness something great being ignited. The atmosphere at Gate C27 stood still for a moment after the words, You will know very soon. A light sentence. Not threatening, not ostentatious, but it made the whole area tremble. Reddick frowned in annoyance. He didn't know who Camille was, but the calm confidence made him uneasy for a second. Then he quickly covered it with familiar anger. He said, Ma'am, I don't have time for your nonsense. Camille looked straight at him. No fear, no retreat. Just the look of someone determined not to let today become a fresh wound for anyone. She opened her small purse and took out her phone. No rush, no drama. Just a very normal action, but it made the tension in the air rise. She dialed a number she knew by heart without looking at it. Security guard Harris reflexively stepped forward. Ma'am, please don't escalate. Camille shook her head gently. I am handling it within my rights. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Reddick stood with his arms crossed, his eyes filled with contempt. He did not bother to hide. On the second hour, someone picked up. The man's voice on the other end of the line was deep, clear and full of authority. Camille, why are you calling at this hour? Aren't you on your way to Seattle? The whole area was silent, Camille replied, her voice calm as if talking about the weather. Mark, I'm at Gate C27, North Star 278. The problem happened earlier than expected. The words Mark startled a few people. Emma looked up, her eyes still filled with tears. Which Mark A, relative A friend, or someone else? Important. Reddick lowered his voice and sarcastically asked, Are you calling your husband or boyfriend to help you get on the plane? Camille looked at him, her eyes expressionless. No. I'm calling the person in charge of all operations at North Star Airlines. Reddick paused for half a second. Some of the passengers gasped. On the other end of the line, Mark Ellison, chairman of the board of directors, said clearly, Camille, tell me what's going on. Camille did not raise her voice nor accuse. She simply spoke in a steady, precise voice. The captain of Flight 278 just stopped me at the gate. He said my ticket might be fake, and that I do not fit the profile. He has now called airport security. Security confirmed my ticket is valid, but he still refuses to let me board the plane. Mark's voice was silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke, each word clear and sharp as a knife cutting glass. Name. Camille replied, Captain Richard Reddick. Behind Camille? Several passengers gulped. Reddick waved his hand, trying to laugh. You think you're scaring Mark. Interrupted, loud enough for Camille to hear Camille. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right down, Camille replied. I will wait. She hung up. All eyes were on Camille. A woman standing nearby exclaimed, Oh my God, she just called? The board. The man behind whispered, trying to cover the recording phone. I think she just called the chairman. Reddick snapped. You think I care who you call? I'm the one in charge here. But his voice was beginning to lose its certainty. Camille put the phone in her pocket as gently as if she had just called a taxi. She did not respond to the provocation. She simply stood straight, a straightforwardness that made it clear to those around her this woman was no ordinary person. Harris whispered, "Ma'am, who was that calling?" Camille looked at him, the boss of all the pilots of the airline. A small sound wave spread through the crowd. Emma raised her hand to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from shock. She exclaimed in a whisper, "Oh my God, what have we done?" Camille tilted her head slightly, her voice soft. "Emma, you did nothing wrong." That was the first sentence that made Emma cry for real. 5 minutes later, a suffocatingly long time, came the sound of hurried footsteps from the end of the corridor. Not security, not the police, but it was 3 men in dark blue North Star suits, running straight toward the waiting gate. The person in front, his tie slightly askew from running in a hurry, was Mark Ellison. Passengers on both sides of the aisle moved aside. Some recognized him from TV press conference videos. Mark was breathing heavily from running, but his eyes were sharp. He stopped before Camille. "Camille? Are you okay?" Camille nodded. "I'm fine. But many people here aren't." Mark turned to Reddick. His look was enough to send a chill down the spine of the entire area. "Captain Richard Reddick." Reddick stood up straighter, trying to adjust his powerful posture. "Yes, I am the one," Mark interrupted. "You know what you just did?" Reddick swallowed. "I implemented security procedures." Mark laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "You stopped a passenger with a valid ticket. You insulted her. You called security to remove her from the flight. You delayed the schedules of nearly 200 people. And the only reason she did not fit the profile," Reddick stammered, "I feel uneasy about her attitude," Mark said slowly. "She—" There was a silence so deep that you could hear the air conditioner. Mark turned and pointed at Camille. "This is the CEO of North Star Airlines." "Oh" echoed throughout the area like a tidal wave. Some people almost screamed in shock. Harris's eyes widened. Torres covered his mouth. Emma staggered and almost fell against the counter. Reddick stood there, frozen. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. But no words came out. Camille was calm. No arrogance, no retaliation. Just standing there, as if the truth were speaking for itself. Mark spoke softly, but each word was as clear as a hammer. "You just insulted, humiliated, and prevented the CEO from boarding a plane. And most importantly, you just did what you are used to doing to people you consider inferior to you." His eyes focused on Reddick. "But today you chose the wrong person." The whole area was silent, as if all sound had been sucked from the air. Camille took a step forward, her voice soft but sharp. "Captain, you don't know who I am. I don't blame you for that. I blame you for treating a human being with contempt." Reddick was speechless. His eyes trembled as he searched for an excuse. Camille continued. "Today it was me. Tomorrow it will be another passenger. Someone who doesn't have the right to make a phone call to defend themselves." A black woman standing to Camille's right said softly, "Thank you." Camille did not turn, but she heard, she felt, she knew her responsibility was much bigger than herself. Mark said the closing sentence, "Camille, do you want to deal with it now or wait for a formal proposal?" Camille looked at Reddick. No revenge, no resentment. Just the look of someone who understands that today must be the day to restore order to North Star. She said, "I want to see how he acts next. If he chooses correctly, I will let the system handle the process. If he chooses incorrectly—" She paused for a moment. Her gaze was as straight as a plane. "Then he decides his own fate." Gate C27 was silent. It remains to be seen, what will Captain Reddick choose? The air in Gate C27 became too thick to breathe normally. Everyone stood still, as if anyone took a deep breath, the truth would burst out. Mark Ellison stood next to Camille, his cold eyes fixed on Captain Reddick. Emma Walsh was frozen, her arms still at her sides, not daring to move. Harris and Torres, the two security guards, stood back a little, realizing the situation had gone beyond their jurisdiction. And Captain Richard Reddick, used to giving orders, used to being obeyed, used to being respected, now stood still like a man who had just wandered into the very world he thought he ruled. Camille made it clear, I want to see how he acts next. It wasn't a threat. It was an empowerment, the final echo of Reddick's choice. But sometimes, people do not realize the opportunity that is standing right in front of them. Reddick breathed heavily. His chest heaved. The veins in his temples throbbed. A small moment flashed by, a moment when it looked like he was about to apologize. But he is not that type of person. A man who is used to using power to cover up his inner weakness will never bow down to a woman of color, especially when his pride has been exposed in public. Reddick clenched his fist, then suddenly pointed straight at Camille. All this is to trap me. The whole area was in an uproar. Mark raised his eyebrows. Trap me. Reddick took a half step forward, his voice high and urgent. She knows who I am. She deliberately provoked me. No normal passenger would behave like that. She's not a victim. She's making things up. A man cursed softly Jesus. Camille stood motionless, her calm making Reddick's turmoil all the more stark. She said softly, I did nothing but wait for my ticket to be scanned. Yes, that's the problem, Reddick snapped. You stood there looking at me with that look, the look of someone who thinks he's better than me. Camille tilted her head. Her voice was soft as a breath. I never thought so. But it was that very statement that made Reddick explode. He roared, Don't talk to me like that. You have no right. I decide who gets on the plane. I have the right to refuse anyone I deem unsuitable. Mark interrupted, cold as metal. It's not based on skin color. Reddick turned to Mark. I am not racist. A black woman in line let out a dry laugh. Captain, that never convinced anyone. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Reddick's face turned red. He pointed at Camille, his voice trembling. I didn't know she was the CEO. If I knew, Camille interrupted, her voice low. If you knew, you wouldn't have done it. Reddick fell silent. The entire Gate C27 seemed to realize a sad truth. He didn't regret his actions. He only regretted hurting the wrong person. Camille nodded slightly, her eyes downcast, more sadness than anger. That is the problem. Reddick seemed backed into a corner, like a wild animal unable to back down. He became more dangerous. He glared. Who do you think you are? A CEO. No one appointed you for your ability. They chose you for show, to polish the brand. You are just a tool for the company to show off. A second gasp echoed through the area. Some passengers shouted, That's enough. Man, you're digging your own grave. Mark Ellison tightened his grip on his briefcase, his voice dropping to a warning. Captain Reddick, stop. But Camille raised her hand and said softly, Let me. She took a half step forward, facing Reddick. Her eyes were so sad that even Torres, the security guard, had to turn away. Camille spoke very slowly, her voice choked but still firm. I don't need you to respect me. I'm not here to be favored. I want to be treated as a human being. That's all. That gentleness made Reddick burst out laughing. You want to be treated like everyone else? You think you're a victim? No, you're not. You're just playing the role that society wants you to play. Camille looked at him. Just for a second. Her eyes became heavy as the deep night. You don't know me. You don't know my story. And you don't know the pain that millions of people like me feel every day. An elderly woman whispered, God bless her. Reddick gasped. He shouted, I don't care about your feelings. I just know you're not suitable for my business class. You don't belong there at that moment. Everything fell apart. A cold silence filled the air. Camille closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, her gaze was as deep as an abyss. That's what he wanted to say from the beginning. No anger, no tears, just the truth spoken in a voice so calm it ached. Mark inhaled sharply and resolutely. Richard Reddick, at this time, you are immediately suspended from duty. Reddick took a step back. You have no right, I do, Mark replied, his voice low but sharp. And I am doing it. A loud gasp broke out from the dozens of people watching. Some whispered finally. Harris took a step forward, Torres standing beside him. Neither of them touched Reddick, but their mere presence told him the game was up. Reddick shook his head, desperately clinging to something. I'm going to sue, I'm going to tell the union. I have 25 years of experience, Camille said softly. Experience cannot heal a broken heart. Reddick trembled, not with anger, but with the knowledge that he had lost, and lost completely. He looked around. No one was on his side. Even his co-pilot, Daniel Young, who had always feared him, avoided his gaze. Finally, Reddick had only one sentence left, uttered full of poison. You will regret confronting me. Camille didn't respond. She just stepped back slightly, as if to let him out of North Star's life. Mark signaled Harris. Torres, get Captain Reddick out of this area. Reddick was taken away not by violence, but by the silence of hundreds of people who witnessed him lose everything. He tried to look back at Camille, his eyes full of hatred. Camille just looked at him, sad and determined. I don't destroy you. You do it yourself. And that was the end of a 25-year career. After Reddick was led away, Mark turned to Camille, his voice softening. Are you okay? Camille took a slow breath, then nodded. I'm fine. But this is just the surface of the problem. Mark looked at her, knowing that Reddick wasn't alone in his error. An entire system had nurtured such people. A passenger said loudly, Ma'am, we support you. Another thank you for standing up. Camille turned back, bowing slightly. Thank you, everyone. No one deserves to be treated like that. Her eyes met Emma's, who was sobbing with shame and relief at the same time. Camille smiled gently. Emma, you did well. Emma cried louder. Camille squeezed her wrist gently, like an older sister comforting a younger sibling. Tomorrow will be better. Gate C27 had just witnessed the end of a toxic era. And it was also the moment Camille officially stepped into her role not just as CEO of the airline, but as the leader of a profound transformation. From afar, the loudspeaker announcement rang out North Star 278, now preparing for crew reassignment. The whole area breathed a sigh of relief. The next chapter was about to begin. After Captain Reddick was taken away, the atmosphere at Gate C27 was no longer as tense as a string. But it wasn't exactly light either. It was like a heavy rain had just passed. The sky was temporarily clear, but the ground was still wet, and people stood looking at each other, unsure of what to say to what they had just witnessed. Camille stood still for a moment. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her breathing. The storm outside had passed, but inside she was still in a turmoil, half pain, half relief. Mark Ellison took a step closer. Camille, if you need a few minutes rest. Camille shook her head slightly. It's okay, Mark. I'm fine. I was just thinking. Mark looked at her, his eyes not of a chairman of the board, but of a man who truly respected his colleagues. What do you think? Camille looked out at the crowd, where a few passengers were still standing, many of them looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. I think there are so many people who have gone through the same thing as me. The only difference is they can't make a phone call like me. Mark was silent for a moment, then said, That's why we need you. Camille didn't reply, just smiled slightly, a smile enough to let her know she wasn't alone on this journey. A dark-skinned woman in her 50s, wearing a gray coat, approached Camille. She hesitated a moment, then said, Miss Hart, thank you. Camille turned around and said gently, I haven't done anything yet. The woman shook her head, her eyes slightly teary. No, you have done so much. You have no idea. I have been through the same thing, not once, but dozens of times in my life. Camille was silent, listening. The woman said, her voice trembling but determined. At this airport, in other places, I was looked at from head to toe, asked questions over and over, followed in the duty-free shop. I thought I was used to it, but when I saw what just happened, I realized I never really got used to it. A gasp. She placed her hand on Camille's, seeing you standing there, calm, not bowing your head. I feel young again, seeing my 20-year-old daughter have more hope. Thank you. Camille squeezed her hand gently, a warm and real squeeze. We all deserve to be treated right. I just did what everyone deserves. The woman smiled, a smile that brought tears. Then she left, her steps lighter as she approached the new boarding gate. A white man with silver hair and a calm appearance walked up next. He stretched his back slightly and said in a low voice, Miss Hart, I want to apologize. Not for the other captain, but for all the times I stayed silent when I saw injustice. Camille looked at him, surprised. He continued, I've lived in the Midwest all my life. I've seen a lot of it, and I've looked away more than I'd like to admit. He sighed deeply, as if releasing a burden he had carried for too long. But today, for the first time, I saw someone stand up, the right way. Not yelling, not cursing, just standing up straight. That was enough to make me feel like I had to change. Camille smiled. Thank you for sharing. Admitting that takes more courage than you think. He chuckled softly. Probably. Then he returned to the queue, looking like a man just awakened. Emma Walsh stood a few feet away, clutching the hem of her dress, her face smeared with mascara. She didn't dare come closer, though it was obvious she wanted to say something. Camille stepped forward. Emma was startled and quickly bowed her head. Miss Hart, I'm really sorry. Camille placed his hand on her shoulder, as gently as a bird's wing. Emma, no need to apologize, but I did wrong. I listened to him. I was afraid of losing my job. Emma's voice was choked. Each word seemed to be stuck in her throat. Camille said softly, I am a frontline worker. I am under pressure from both sides, passengers and crew. It is not my fault. It is the fault of a system that scares me. Emma's tears welled up again. I didn't want to be a bystander anymore. But at that time, I didn't know what to do. Camille nodded slightly. I will learn, and I will do better next time. That's the most important thing. Emma clutched her chest, breathing a sigh of relief, as if she had just been forgiven a heavy burden. Thank you. Camille. Camille smiled. Just call me Camille. Then a young man, maybe in his early 20s, approached. He had neat curly hair and a huge backpack on his back. He said, his voice emotional but calm, Miss Hart, you have no idea, you just saved someone like me. Camille was surprised. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. I was going to be a pilot, but I quit. Because I'm black. I saw how some people in the industry looked at us, judged us, doubted us. I quit because I didn't belong there. A beat of silence. He looked at Camille, his eyes glistening with tears, but today, seeing you standing there, calm, strong, I thought, maybe I can try again. Camille felt her throat tighten. She tried to keep her voice steady. You should try again. Not for me, but because you deserve to fly, if that's your dream. He smiled, a shy but hopeful smile. Thank you, that from the bottom of my heart. When he left, Camille stood still. Gate C27 was now silent. No more murmurs, no more tension. Only the sound of the luggage cart rolling in the distance and the loudspeaker announcing the schedule remained. Camille closed her eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her mother, Diane Hart, in an old blue scrub, standing at the hospital sink, patting Camille's hand when she was 17. You are stronger than you think. Camille opened her eyes, and today, for the first time in years, she felt it more clearly than ever before. Not because she's the CEO, Not because she just won someone, but because she found the most important thing: strength is the ability to make others want to stand with you. Mark stepped closer. We have to arrange a new crew. I've already contacted them. But Camille, what you did today will make a big splash. Camille looked at him. I know, but I don't do it for the buzz. Mark nodded. I know. That's why the echo is stronger. Camille smiled slightly, saying nothing. She looked at the people around her, the people who had witnessed, suffered with, and stood up with her. And deep down, she understood North Star's transformation. Journey didn't begin in the CEO's office. It began at Gate C27, where a black woman is considered inappropriate. But it proves that appropriateness is not in the eye of the beholder. It is in how we stand up to injustice. And Camille Hart stood strong. As things at Gate C27 settled down, a security guard approached Mark Ellison and Camille, handing Mark the intercom. We have contacted the backup crew. Captain Daniel Young is on his way. Mark looked at Camille. Daniel is on standby today. He's one of the best we have. Camille nodded, but still felt a little uneasy. The Reddick incident had made her wary of anyone with 4 yellow stripes on their sleeves. In this business, power sometimes made people forget who they served. She took a deep breath. Okay. We'll talk to him directly when he comes. A few minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway leading to the gate. A tall, brown man with close-cropped hair and a sharp face approached the sturdy, supple build of a pilot with tens of thousands of hours of flight experience. He wore a neat uniform, white shirt, captain's hat tucked under his arm. He stopped in front of Camille and Mark. Morning, Mr. Ellison. Morning, Miss Hart. Morning. His voice was deep, clear, and unhurried. Camille was a little surprised. You know me. Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with respect rather than curiosity. I always try to stay updated on new leadership, especially when that person is about to decide the future of the company I have been with for more than 18 years. Mark chuckled. He says that, but actually Daniel reads more news than all the other pilots combined. Daniel tilted his head, neither denying nor praising himself. Camille watched him for a few seconds. The first thing she sensed was humility. Unlike Reddick, who wore his power like a crown, Daniel wore his power like a warm coat, necessary but not for show. She raised her voice. Thank you for coming so quickly. We had a little trouble earlier. Daniel replied immediately. I heard it on the radio. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you had to go through that. No beating around the bush, no blaming, no backtracking, just a sincere statement. Camille bowed slightly in thanks. Mr. Young, Camille said, I want to hear your assessment of the situation and whether we can take off within 30 minutes. Daniel thought for a moment and then replied, technically, absolutely fine. Backup crew on standby. New aircraft inspection after incident. Weather fine. He paused, then added, but there is one thing to review. Camille frowned. What is that morale? Said Daniel. Both of the passengers and the crew. Camille was a little surprised by his answer. She had expected him to talk about checklists, fuel, flight paths, humidity, technical things. But Daniel continued. I just walked through the waiting area. Some people were worried. Some were upset. Some were still discussing what had just happened. He looked at Camille, frankly but not disrespectfully. If we force takeoff right away, the crew will be flying in an unstable state of mind. That is not against the regulations, but it is against the safety that passengers deserve. Camille looked him in the eye. Not every pilot would dare say that. Not every pilot would put people before flight time. A moment later, she nodded. How much more time do you want? 10 minutes. Only 10 minutes. Camille was surprised. Enough for me to talk to the crew. Enough for the passengers to see the face of a new captain and understand that this flight is run by someone who respects them. This time, Mark himself had to smile with satisfaction. Camille said, You are allowed to do as you see fit. Daniel just nodded slightly, then turned and walked towards the boarding door. He walked straight into the temporary waiting room. Hundreds of people looked up at him when he appeared. No microphone needed, no speaker needed. Just one man's voice standing firm in the midst of chaos. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The chatter stopped. Daniel continued. Clearly and warmly, I'm Captain Daniel Young. I'll be taking you to Denver this morning. A few sighs of relief were heard. I know you guys have been through something bad, and I want to say this slowly. What happened just now does not reflect the values of North Star. He bowed his head slightly. I and your new crew will ensure everything from now on is done properly, safely, and respectfully. The room was silent. Daniel smiled, gently but sincerely. If anyone needs reassurance, needs to ask about the flight, or simply needs an apology from the airline, I'm willing to stand here for a few more minutes. An elderly passenger spoke loudly. Captain, thank you for coming. We just want to fly without being looked down upon. Daniel nodded. I promise you today, no one will be looked down upon. Not a big promise, but enough to stabilize a wounded collective. From afar, Camille watched. She saw how Daniel put his hand over his heart as he apologized, how he listened to each person, how he bowed low when a passenger panicked, fearing a repeat. She feels a natural leadership instinct that not everyone has. Mark stood next to her, arms crossed. He was always like that, but he never had the opportunity to show it at a higher level. Camille Key sang, Why Mark shrugged. He doesn't like internal fighting. He doesn't like scoring points. He's the type of person who's too good to climb the ladder quickly. Camille mused. She had been there. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated just because she wasn't loud. When Daniel finished and turned back, Camille said Captain Young. He stood up straight. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the way you handled the situation. Daniel was a little embarrassed. I just did what needed to be done. Camille looked at him, tilting her head slightly. Not everyone knows what to do. Captain. Daniel was a little stunned by that weighty way of calling. Then Camille continued. I want to see you after the flight. We have some important matters to discuss. Daniel frowned slightly. What's up? Camille did not answer immediately. She let a beat of silence, a deliberate silence, opening up curiously. About the future of North Star, and about the position, I think. You might be a better fit for... Daniel blinked, unable to hide his surprise. Mark stood next to him and chuckled. He doesn't understand yet, but he will. Daniel was confused. I'm just the captain. Camille replied in a deep, steady, warm voice. Today I saw a captain, but I also saw someone who can lead the way. That statement made Daniel stand still for a few seconds. Something inside him. Not excitement, but the feeling that a door had opened. A door he never dared to knock on. As Daniel went to prepare for boarding, Mark turned to Camille. What position are you trying to elevate him to? Camille replied, her eyes following Daniel's figure. I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. This airline needs people who understand that respect for people is the foundation of safety. Mark nodded. I support you. Camille took a deep breath. Much to fix, much to fight. But in that moment, she knew she had found an ally. A person does not need an introduction to understand what to do. Someone who could help her rebuild the North Star culture from the bottom up. As Captain Young left to prepare for the flight, Camille found the space around her suddenly empty. The noises of the airport, the loudspeaker announcements, the scuffling of shoes on the floor, the crunch of suitcases on rubber wheels all blended together like a mist. There were many eyes on her today. Some were grateful, some were hopeful, and some were filled with anticipation for something greater. But in this moment, when the chaos had calmed down, Camille just wanted to sit down and breathe. Mark touched her arm lightly. Do you need anything? Water or a quiet corner? Camille shook her head, smiling faintly. I'm fine. Then she paused. Actually, maybe a quiet corner would be nice. Mark nodded and led her to a small cabin, reserved for flight crews, a temporary restroom, often used during long delays. The room was simple: a couch, a locker, a hot water heater, and soft yellow lighting to make the space less cold. When the door closed behind her, Camille sat down on the bench. She relaxed, as if she had been standing in a strong wind for a while, and now she could sit down and check for any scratches. Mark said softly, "Camille, you are strong. You stood so strong today that everyone was in awe of you." Camille bowed her head, looking at her clasped hands. "Mark, have you ever thought that the strongest person was once the weakest?" Mark was a little stunned. Camille exhaled, her hand gently stroking her knee. "When I was little, I saw my mother being treated unfairly by the very system that was supposed to protect her. I saw her come home from long shifts. Her shoulders slumped as if she was carrying the weight of the world on her back. But she still smiled at me. Every day." She looked up at Mark, her eyes soft but tired. "I grew up thinking that if my mom could stand up after what she went through, then I had no right to fall." Mark sat down beside her, saying nothing. Sometimes silence is the most sincere sympathy. Camille continued, her voice low and slow, as if each sentence were a page of memory being opened. "When I was in my 20s, I applied for an internship at a small airline. I remember the day a supervisor looked at my CV and said, 'Are you sure you want to work in this industry? It's not easy, especially for someone like you.'" Camille smiled faintly at that time. I was so naive that I asked again, "What do you mean?" And he just vaguely said, "I know." Then he left. Mark shivered slightly. "I know that kind of person." Camille nodded. "Anyone who has worked in the industry for a long time knows?" She glanced out the small window of the flight deck, where she could see part of the runway and the tail of the North Star preparing for boarding. At that moment, memories suddenly flooded back like an unannounced wave. Decades ago, Dallas Airport. A summer morning. Camille was 24 years old at the time, standing at the boarding gate to assist passengers when the system had a problem. A middle-aged man, looking wealthy, looked her up and down and said, "You're not the type I think would be able to do this." Camille swallowed. "Yes, sir, the system is down. I will try to assist as soon as possible." "No," he interrupted. "I mean, you don't look like a professional airline person." His look, his voice, all said what he didn't say. The feeling, the cold, stinging humiliation stung her deeper than the words could articulate. No one stood up for her that day. No one said a word in defense. No one apologized to her for the pain she had to swallow. Camille returned to the present when Mark spoke up. "Camille, you don't have to be strong all the time." She shook her head slightly. "It's not because I want to be strong. Mark, it's because I have to be strong. I'm not the only one standing there today. I stand on behalf of millions of women of color and who have been told, 'Don't fit in.'" She smiled slightly, a smile both proud and tired. "And if I collapse, what will that say to them?" Mark put his hand on Camille's shoulder. "It would say, even the strongest person needs someone to stand by their side." Camille was silent. Her eyes glanced at the floor, then up at the ceiling as if searching for an answer somewhere among the light bulbs. Then she took a deep breath. "You're right. But Mark, can you change a culture that's rotten to the core?" Mark didn't answer right away. He stood up, went to the locker, got a glass of water, and gave it to Camille. "You don't need to change everything in one day." He looked straight at her, his voice firm but not hard. "You just need to change to the right place. Right person. Right time." He pointed out the window where Daniel Young was talking to an elderly passenger. "Like him. Like the people who stood up for me in the waiting room. Like little Emma. Like the people who needed me to believe in them." Camille bit her lip. 1 second, 2 seconds, then she nodded slightly. "I got it." She stood up, adjusted her coat, and tied her hair back, a small act. But it felt like she was resetting herself. Her eyes became clearer. We'll start on this flight. Mark? Mark smiled, I guess so. Camille walked to the door, her hand on the handle, then paused, not opening it right away. She said, her voice small but deep, Mark. Thank you for coming with me. Mark nodded slightly. I'm not going with you. Camille? She turned back, slightly surprised. Mark smiled gently. I follow you, because I believe you are leading the right way. The words made Camille feel a heat rise in her throat, a silent emotion, but it spread from her heart to her chest and then up to her eyes. She didn't let the tears fall, but she felt one thing clearly: she no longer has to fight alone. When the door opened, the airport noise rushed in again, vivid, chaotic, real. Camille stepped out. The light from the ceiling made her eyes squint slightly, but then she quickened her pace. She went through a storm, but the storm is not over yet. And because of that, she had to be stronger. She said to herself, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but so that tomorrow, people like me don't have to go through what I went through. She headed towards Gate C27, where the passengers were waiting, where Daniel was preparing to board, where the future was opening a crack in the door. Camille took a deep breath. Then move on. When Camille returned to Gate C27 area, she immediately realized that the place was no longer the same as a few minutes ago. No longer just passengers waiting for boarding. No longer just the rhythmic sounds of the airport. But now, with lenses, 5, then 6. Then a dozen cameras are set up. The signs of local and national news agencies flash under the portable LED lights. A few reporters are live streaming on their phones. Mark sighed. I knew this would happen, but not so fast. Camille felt her heart tighten too. She wasn't afraid of the camera. She was afraid of the truth being distorted, as it had been so many times in her life. A group of reporters rushed over when they saw her appear. Miss Hart, can you tell me what happened this morning? Is there racism within the company? Has Pilot Reddick ever been reported? Did you feel safe flying North Star before you became CEO? The questions were sharp as knives. Mark stepped forward like a shield. Sorry, we'll have an official press release. Miss Hart doesn't give interviews here. But Camille put her hand on Mark's sleeve, gently but firmly. No. Let me. Mark turned around. Worried Camille. She shook her head. If I avoid today, I am no different from the system that has hurt me for so many years. Mark sighed, but nodded. Camille stepped forward a small distance, enough for the reporters to see clearly but not jostle each other. She spoke slowly, clearly. Neither defensively nor offensively, I know you're looking for answers. And I also know that what happened this morning was more than just a matter between a passenger and a pilot. A wave of silence tore through the crowd. Camille continued, I was denied boarding. Despite having a valid ticket, I was considered a fraud simply because of the color of my skin. There is no denying this. Many reporters bent down to take notes. Others brought their microphones closer. Camille looked straight at them. But I want to say the most important thing. North Star will be responsible. I will be responsible. A question pops up. Are you the target of racism? Camille replied, I am not the only target. I am just one of countless people who have gone through the same thing. She lowered her voice, deep but warm, easy to get into people's hearts. My responsibility is not just to protect myself. It is to protect anyone who stands where I stood this morning. That statement made the atmosphere quiet down. A few reporters, although still working, their eyes seemed to soften. Another question arose. Are you going to sue Pilot Reddick? Camille said frankly, North Star will follow the process. But this doesn't end with one person being fired. If a rotten culture allows this behavior to persist, then we have to clean up the whole thing. A young reporter said loudly, What do you mean by roots? Camille was about to reply. But just then, a man in a dark gray suit, with a name tag reading Airport Management, approached with 2 security guards. He didn't look at Camille, but looked at Mark. First, Mr. Ellison. We need to speak with you and Miss Hart privately. Now. Mark frowned. What is up? The man tilted his head toward the hallway. There is information that this morning's incident was more serious than initially reported. Camille listened, her heart beating faster. What do you mean? The man replied in a low voice so the reporter couldn't hear. There is evidence that Captain Reddick did not act alone. A shiver ran down Camille's spine. The man opened a tablet. On the screen was a scan of several emails that had been leaked from North Star's internal system. Mark frowned and read quickly. Camille stood close. The lines that caught my eye. Keep an eye on the new CEO. We don't need her poking around the pilot union. If she tries flying undercover, make sure she understands where she stands. And the last line, R, will know what to do. R. Those two letters are like a knife. Mark squeezed the tablet until his knuckles turned white. R. There, Reddick. The airport man nodded. The thing is, this email was sent from a senior management address within your company. Camille felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of cold water in her face. It's not just the spontaneous behavior of an arrogant pilot. It's not just a personal matter. But it was an arrangement, a reminder of her true position in someone's eyes. Mark gritted his teeth. Who sent it? The man hesitated. The account name is partially hidden, but the address belongs to the Operations Management Group Vice President level. Camille closed her eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she opened her eyes. The trembling in her gaze was gone. Instead, it was dangerously calm. Thanks for reporting it. I'll take care of it. The man nodded and left. Mark Qui sang Camille. Do you know what this means? Camille nodded slightly. I mean, I'm not just cleaning a room. I'm cleaning a house that's been inhabited for a long time. A reporter's voice rang out from afar. Miss Hart. Miss Hart, is North Star hiding something? Camille took a deep breath. She turned around and walked forward to the crowd of reporters. I will say the last sentence for this morning. The group fell silent. Camille looked at each person, her eyes calm. But sharp as metal bent by fire, North Star has nothing to hide. If there is anything, we will expose it. A beat of silence. Then she spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. If anyone inside thinks they can threaten me, they should remember that I am not here to be a scarecrow. She breathed a sigh of relief. I came to fix it. Mark stood beside her, looking at her with a mixture of worry and admiration. Are you ready for the big battle? Camille replied, her voice low but strong. Mark, I didn't choose this battle. It came to me. Then she clenched her hands into fists. And I will not run. In the distance, Captain Daniel Young just stepped out of the jet bridge, seeing the chaotic scene of the media. He saw Camille standing in the center, small in the crowd, but steady as a pillar. Daniel slowly exhaled. He knew she would need someone on her side, and he decided you will be that person. The reporters cleared their cameras, and passengers began boarding under the guidance of a new crew. But inside Camille, the storm was still raging. She knew she had to keep her cool, to make everything smooth so the passengers wouldn't feel the internal earthquake shaking right beneath their feet. But as the boarding door closed and Captain Young officially boarded the plane, Mark lightly touched Camille's elbow. Now we have a few minutes of real privacy. Camille nodded. The two men left Gate C27 and walked down the narrow corridor that led to North Star's executive offices at Midway Airport, a low-key area reserved for managers, key pilots, and emergency meetings only. The door closed behind them, and there was no more sound of passengers or cameras. The room was strangely silent. Camille stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, eyes staring into space before her as if sorting through her jumbled thoughts. Mark placed the tablet containing the leaked emails on the table. Camille, are you ready to take another look? She took a deep breath. Show me. Mark opened the screen. The email was short, but heavy as a rock. Keep an eye on the new CEO. She's too tech-oriented. We need to block her from digging. If she tries flying undercover, remind her of her place. We'll know what to do, Camille muttered. The tone of someone familiar with the situation is one of command, or thinks they have authority. Mark frowned. I asked the IT department to trace the sender. The email was sent from an account in the operations group, the vice president in charge of fleet rotation. Camille stood up straight, her eyes sharp. Who is it? Mark looked at her. Hesitantly, Camille. I want you to calm down when you hear your name. Camille did not blink. Go on. Mark. He sighed, his shoulders slumped. Leonard Briggs and the air in the room seemed to stop. It took Camille a few seconds to say Leonard. Briggs Mark nodded, silent. Leonard Briggs, vice president of operations, the man who was shortlisted for CEO by the board before they decided on Camille, the man who has worked with many powerful groups internally, the man with a wide network of contacts, but also known for his ambiguous, sometimes racist, statements. Camille felt her body go cold. Are you sure? Mark. The email address belongs to the group managed by Briggs. No one other than his superiors has access to this system. Camille turned and took a few steps across the room, each step heavier. She had met Briggs 3 times, once at a strategy meeting, twice at a pilot conference. He always smiled in an overly polite way, the kind of person who thinks one thing but says another. Camille recalled something he said after a brief meeting the day she took office. Congratulations. Miss Hart, I hope you are not too sensitive to the reactions in the industry. Aviation is a place of cool heads, not emotions. Camille had only smiled back then. Now she understood. That statement was a warning. Mark sat down on the chair. Camille, I know this is hard to believe, but part of the council wanted Briggs. He lost his chance to you. Maybe he didn't take it well. Camille clenched her hands, not in anger, but with a familiar pang of pain. It's not easy to accept. Because who are you? Mark was silent, unable to deny, unwilling to lie. Camille answered for him. Because I'm a woman of color. Because I'm almost 2 decades younger than him. Because I'm not part of his group. Mark breathed heavily. Maybe he thought reminding you would make you back down, or make the council doubt your abilities. Camille laughed, a thin, unhappy laugh. So he used a racist pilot as a reminder. She turned back to look at Mark, her eyes calm but scary. Did he think about the possibility of an innocent passenger getting hurt, or a frontline worker getting dragged into trouble? Mark shook his head. I understand Briggs, he doesn't care about people. He only cares about his influence. Camille stood still for a moment. Then she said softly, This is not your business anymore. Mark looked up at her. What are you going to do? Camille turned around, her eyes shining brighter. Meet him? Mark sighed. Camille, Briggs is a dangerous man. He has influence. He has networks. He has experience in internal strife. Camille interrupted. And I have the truth. A long silence. Then Mark nodded. Almost helplessly, I will go with you. Camille shook her head. No, I'll meet Briggs alone. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Camille held up a hand. Mark, this is a battle that, if I don't face it head on, I will lose from the start. Mark looked at her, then sighed. Then I'll wait outside the door. I won't let you enter a locked room. Camille smiled slightly. Thank you. Leonard Briggs's office was on the upper floor, large windows overlooking the runway. The office door was ajar, letting in cold white light. Briggs was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, as casual as if nothing were happening. When he saw Camille enter, he turned around, his lips curling slightly. Miss Hart, I was about to contact you. Camille stood up straight. We need to talk. Briggs walked to the table, poured water, and said indifferently, I heard about the incident this morning. It's unfortunate. But you know, the aviation industry is complicated. Pilots sometimes get stressed. Overreact, Briggs? Camille interrupted, her voice low but sharp as a saw. Briggs raised his eyebrows slightly, clearly not used to being interrupted mid-sentence. Camille went one step further. You send email. Briggs's heart jumped slightly, whether from surprise or fear. He couldn't tell, but Camille saw it all. She continued. The email reminds me. The email says Reddick knows what to do. The email is from the group he manages. Briggs put the glass of water down on the table, his face unchanged. You are speaking very seriously. Miss Hart? Camille replied immediately. I know. Briggs folded his arms. Do you have the proof I sent? Camille looked him straight in the eye. There is evidence the email came from your group. Briggs smiled, a smile filled with contempt. My group doesn't mean me. Camille took another step. The distance between them was now only a few feet. You are right, but you are forgetting one thing. Briggs blinked. What Camille said, her voice low and clear, I don't need you to admit it. I don't need you to admit. I just need you to know. I'm not afraid of you. The smile on Briggs's lips vanished. Camille continued, If you caused this morning to scare me, you picked the wrong man. Briggs looked at her for a few seconds, his eyes unreadable but tinged with worry. Then he chuckled softly, Miss Hart. You are young. You don't understand how this industry works. Camille replied, No, I understand perfectly. It's just, I don't play by your rules. Briggs leaned his arms on the table. Do you think you can change something that has existed for decades? Camille bowed her head slightly, then looked up. Not that I think. She put her hand on her chest. But I know. Briggs's face darkened. Camille said the last sentence. If you are part of the problem, you will be the first to go. Camille turned and left the room. Briggs stood still, his hands clasped together, his face no longer as calm as before. As Camille closed the door, Briggs muttered very quietly, but enough for anyone outside to hear if they paid attention. You think you can play my game? Camille stepped out into the hallway. Mark immediately approached. Are you okay? Camille nodded slightly. Fine. But in her eyes was a new fire. A fire never burned so strong. After her confrontation with Leonard Briggs, Camille walked briskly down the hallway, leading to North Star's temporary office at Midway. Her heels clicked lightly on the floor, a steady rhythm but each step carrying weight. Mark walked beside her, watching her walk, not the walk of a young CEO, but the walk of someone preparing to step into a fight that many before her had chosen to avoid. Are you sure you want to do it today? Mark asked, his voice tinged with worry. Camille didn't stop. If you let it go a day, Briggs will erase the traces. Mark understood. For someone like Briggs, every minute of delay could mean a file being edited, a record being destroyed, a witness being persuaded to stay silent. They entered the makeshift office, a small room but filled with internal servers, a desk, and a large monitor mounted on the wall. Camille put the documents on the table and turned to Mark. I want all of Richard Reddick's records from the past 10 years. Mark frowned. Camille, that's over 1,000 pages of documents. I know. It will take all day. Then let's start now. Mark looked at Camille for a few seconds, then nodded. I'll call compliance and send over the scan. Just 10 minutes later, a series of files appeared on the big screen performance review. Reddick, passenger complaint, 2013 internal report, crew conflict, union notes, flight IR-221 incident. A long string without end. Camille pulled out a chair, sat down, and opened the first file. Mark sat next to her. His shoulders slumped as if he knew he was about to read something bad. Camille opened the first complaint file. An Indian passenger accused Reddick of using a disparaging tone and racist innuendo. The file was marked unfounded. Second file. A Puerto Rican flight attendant claims Reddick regularly threatened new employees. Marked unfounded. Camille frowned. Why does every complaint end the same? Mark sighed. Because the person who assessed those complaints was Briggs. Camille squeezed the mouse. A meaningful squeeze. She opened the third file. A flight attendant once wrote, Captain Reddick asked me to move the black passengers to the back of the cabin. because they were disrupting the visual order. I refused and was docked 3 months of flying time. Mark unfounded, no witness. Camille pursed her lips, eyes flashing with the resentment she tried to suppress. No witnesses. There is never just one witness on an airplane. Mark whispered. The system was set up to protect him. Camille replied, that system must collapse. She opened the fourth file. One file was much thicker, nearly 60 pages. It described a 2017 incident in which Reddick yelled at a Middle Eastern passenger at the boarding gate. There was no video, no audio, just a report from a young employee. The writer of the report signed Emma Walsh. Camille froze. Is it Emma? Mark moved closer to the screen. Emma was 18 at the time, doing an internship. Camille continued reading, her eyes slowly skimming each line I witnessed, Captain Reddick requesting that the passenger remove his turban for additional security screening. The passenger objected. The captain loudly called him suspicious and asked security to escort him away. I believe the passenger was not at fault, but I was not asked to comment. I felt it was wrong. But I didn't do anything. Camille put her hand to her forehead. Injustice leaves scars, but helplessness leaves deeper wounds. Mark looked at Camille and sighed softly. You see how Briggs has been protecting Reddick for a long time. Camille turned back, her eyes no longer angry, but a quiet determination like the black stones at the bottom of the sea. It wasn't just Briggs, but there was someone else. Someone who covered up a little more. Mark asked, what do you rely on? Camille pointed to the footer of another report, a small line that few people noticed. Reviewed and filed by CFO N. Grant. Mark was startled. Noah Grant. Camille nodded slowly. Noah Grant, CFO, almost equal in rank to Mark. A quiet but powerful figure in the company. He is quiet and inconspicuous, but always shows up at every important meeting. Mark whispered, Noah is involved in this? Camille leaned back in her chair, eyes looking up at the ceiling. If Briggs was the one who set it up, then there must have been someone with enough financial power to protect him for years. Mark swallowed. But Noah has always been very neutral. Camille shook her head. No one is neutral before power. Only those who know how to hide themselves. She opened the sixth file, a file whose contents were partially encrypted, so that only the leadership could read it. Mark was surprised. Do you have access to that file? Camille looked at him, her lips slightly curled. I'm the CEO, Mark. File opens. The scanned pages were old. The ink was smudged at the edges. The date was 2014, 10 years ago. Tuaje Internal Inquiry, Incident Airfield 22B. Camille scrolled down to the content. Captain Reddick involved in verbal altercation with 2 ramp agents. Use of discriminatory language confirmed by 1 anonymous witness. Recommended temporary suspension. Camille paused at the last line, the hand-typed line, and added overruled. Withhold disciplinary action. Signed Noah Grant. Camille leaned back in her chair. Mark held his head. Noah protected Reddick from the beginning. From 10 years ago? Camille put the pieces together in her head like a jigsaw puzzle Briggs arranges. Noah protects. Reddick is the one used to keep the old culture alive. All 3 form a power triangle. And she is the spearhead that is stabbing straight into the center of that triangle. Camille asked Mark. Did you ever doubt Noah? Mark shook his head slowly. Never. Yes, Noah is a gentle, calm person. I always thought he just wanted the company to be stable. Camille smiled faintly. Stability? By whose definition? Mark was silent. Camille turned the tablet closer to her, looking at Noah's signature, neat, clean, cold as metal. Mark, I need to see Noah. Mark was startled. No, I don't have clear evidence that Briggs and Noah are working together. Camille nodded slightly. Yes, so I need to talk to you directly. Mark shook his head. Noah is wise. He won't let it show. Camille stood up. Her eyes no longer hesitated, Mark. There are people whose first reaction is enough to tell the truth. Mark looked at her for a few seconds, then sighed. Accepting, I'll contact Noah. The meeting will be in an hour. Camille nodded. Thank you. Mark turned away to make a phone call, but Camille added, her voice soft but deep. Mark, he turned back. We have opened a door. She pointed to the hundreds of files on the screen. And from now on, we can't go back. Mark nodded. I know. But I'm here. Camille breathed lightly, her eyes shining with quiet determination. Good. Because some truths will be hard to hear. The door closed after Mark went out. Camille stood alone in the bright white room. She looked at the files containing a decade of injustice. Voices muffled, truths buried. She knew the real battle had only just begun. And the next person she faces, not Briggs, but it's Noah Grant. The meeting with Noah Grant was arranged with suspicious speed. It took Mark less than 5 minutes to get a response. Noah is on his way to the Midway office. Camille stood by the window, watching the planes taxiing down the runway. The Chicago sky was overcast, the clouds low and heavy as a warning. Mark walked in and said softly, Noah is here. Camille turned, adjusting her coat. Not to appear strong, she was already strong, but to maintain composure, as was her own tradition. A leader had to be the backbone of an organization. The door opens, Noah Grant enters. He was in his early 50s, tall, with neatly combed gray hair. He looked more like a college professor than a CFO. He smiled politely at Camille, but his eyes sharpened when he touched the laptop open on the table. Camille, Noah said warmly. I just heard. You wanted to see me. Camille invited him to sit. Noah placed his black briefcase on the table, turned in his chair, and kept his composure as usual. We need to talk about old files, Camille began. Noah frowned slightly. What records? North Star has thousands. Camille turned the large screen toward him. On it were the familiar words reviewed and filed by CFO N. Grant. For a split second, his expression changed very slightly, but enough for Camille to see. Not panic, not surprise, but annoyance. Noah's eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering the speed of his retreat. Camille. This is a long time ago, he said, his tone seeming to cool the conversation. North Star had many problems in those years. The reports were in accordance with the procedures at the time. Camille calmly. What procedures allow discrimination complaints to be suppressed? Noah didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together. Not all of it is discrimination. An intern was threatened. A Middle Eastern passenger was asked to remove her scarf. A flight attendant had her flight time deducted for no reason. It was all related to the same person. Camille spoke slowly, enunciating each word, Captain Richard Reddick. Noah's eyes narrowed slightly, a small sign that spoke louder than words. Mark stood behind Camille, arms crossed, watching silently. The air in the room was so thick, it looked like it might evaporate into rain. Camille took a step, but not threateningly, just as if to bridge the gap in truth I need to know. Why did you sign the lines, withhold disciplinary action? Noah took a deep breath, then reached up to remove his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if stalling for time before answering. Camille, there are things. I think you'll understand the longer you're in the CEO position. Camille raised an eyebrow at that statement. It was the voice of the older generation of leaders, those who believed that everything had an internal reason. Explain, Camille said. Noah put down his glasses, his bare eyes looking at her. North Star was going through a crisis. Pilots were quitting. The union was putting pressure on them every day. You couldn't let a veteran captain get suspended over a report that wasn't supported by evidence. Camille remained calm, but those cases are of a similar nature. Noah replied, same, but not strong enough to interfere with the captain's abilities. Camille squinted. You mean, does keeping the pilot is more important than the passengers? This time, Noah answered immediately. Keeping pilots is more important than losing dozens of flights because of union strikes? Mark frowned. You're talking as if North Star can only survive by pandering to toxic captains. Noah Quee sang, Mark, it's not about direction. It's about balance. North Star can't handle the additional volatility. Camille crossed her arms and lowered her voice. Does someone benefit from keeping Reddick? The atmosphere changed instantly. Noah clenched his fists slightly, losing his composure for the first time. Camille, what are you implying? She sat down, hands placed in front of her. Her voice soft but sharp as a paper knife, I think. Reddick isn't just being protected because he's a veteran captain. There's some benefit in keeping him. Noah stiffened. Camille added, is he the one who gets someone? Mark looked at Camille, startled. It was a question he had not even thought of. Noah placed both hands on the table. You're going too far. Camille did not blink. Or not far enough. There was a long silence. Camille ignored the tension, only watching the slightest expression on Noah's face. He is defending very strongly. That only happens when something really dark happens. Finally. Noah sighed, a heavy sigh as if touching a corner of memory he wanted to hide. Camille. That year, North Star had an incident. Camille tilted her head. Airfield 22B. Noah looked at her, his eyes filled with surprise. The first completely genuine emotion he had felt since entering the room. You have seen it that far? I watch everything. Noah gently turned the glasses in his hand. His voice lowered. That case? There were 2 reports. Camille frowned. I only see one. Yes, because another copy was pulled from the system. Mark straightened up. Who did it? Noah looked into Camille's eyes, as if accepting a truth that had just been brought to light. Briggs. Camille was not surprised, but she calmly asked why. Noah replied, his voice heavy as if dragging on the cement floor. Because in the withdrawn report, Briggs was the one accused of forcing Reddick to handle the case improperly. Camille felt a chill run down her spine. Forced. What Noah spoke slowly and clearly, Briggs directed Reddick to blame the 2 ramp employees. But the witness wrote it down, and Briggs panicked. He deleted the report. Mark growled. And you signed everything with your eyes closed. Noah turned away, avoiding Mark's gaze. I want to keep North Star alive? Star. If it becomes public, the union will demand both of your heads. Camille stood up. She no longer tried to hide the disappointment in her eyes. I chose the easiest solution. Noah did not object. Camille continued. You choose to protect the company, but forget that the company is people. Noah said slowly, I know. And I lived with that burden for 10 years. The words made Camille pause. For a brief moment, she saw in Noah not just a defender of power, but a man crushed by it. But that sympathy quickly dissipated. The truth remains the truth. She said, I need the withdrawn report. Noah replied immediately. No longer in the system. Camille tilted her head. So Briggs kept a copy. Noah was silent, tantamount to admission. Camille slowly took a breath. I will ask you to provide a statement regarding Briggs's manipulation of the records. Noah looked at her, trembling slightly. You want to take down Briggs? Camille looked straight at him. I want to take down the people who are corrupting North Star. Noah narrowed his eyes, his voice low as if whispering, Camille, be careful. Briggs isn't alone. She asked immediately. What do you mean? Noah hesitated for a few seconds, then spoke so softly that Mark had to hold his breath to hear Briggs. Has someone backing him? Someone higher up than me, and almost as high as you. The room froze, Camille said bluntly. Name. Noah looked at her. His eyes were full of fear. I will write it in the affidavit. But Camille, you must prepare yourself. Camille stood up straight, her voice eerily calm. I was prepared from the moment I stepped foot in North Star. Noah left the room. The door closed. Mark Quay sang Camille. Who do you think that person is? Camille was silent for a few seconds, then replied, If Briggs can't touch the system, there must be someone with greater authority. Mark swallowed, I think. On the board, Camille looked out the window, her voice soft but firm, or in the executive board, in a position very close to us. The room fell silent again, a silence that signaled that the battle about to unfold was far beyond anything they had ever faced. And Camille knew the most dangerous part of the truth is coming. The conference room fell silent, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Camille stood by the window, watching the Chicago sky fade to late afternoon. Thin gray clouds stretched across the horizon like a hazy curtain, making the city seem more distant. She felt Mark looking at her, silent, as if waiting to see how she would react to Noah's revelation. "Are you okay?" Mark asked, his voice not too loud, but enough to break the silence. Camille took a deep breath. "Not quite, but I knew this was coming." Mark nodded, saying nothing more. He understood Camille was not the type to be stuck in the truth. She kept moving forward, even if the road ahead was dark. Less than 2 hours later, Mark and Camille had Noah Grant's affidavit in their hands. He delivered it personally, not by email, not through a secretary, as if he was afraid something would disappear again if he made one wrong move. Camille opened the document. The first line made her heart jump. The person who ordered the removal of the Airfield 22B incident report was Chairman of Operations Harold Whitmore. Camille read the name over and over again. Whitmore. Harold Whitmore. She knew him, the man who sat on the board of directors with the elegant smile and gentle voice, a man considered a cultural pillar of North Star. Mark leaned back in his chair, his face tense. Whitmore, Camille. He's been here for over 30 years. He's more influential than the previous CEO. Camille put the papers down on the table. She felt a pang in her chest, not anger, but deep disappointment. The longer it is, the easier it becomes to become part of the rot. Mark said in a low voice, "What are you going to do?" Camille looked him straight in the eye. "We have to face it. We can't let this route go unnoticed for another day." The next day's emergency meeting was held in the 28th floor conference room, where North Star's most important strategic meetings ever took place. Harold Whitmore entered. He wore a gray suit and held a thick file in his hand. He looked calm, but his eyes avoided Camille. Mark opened the meeting. "We have a matter to clear up." "Harold." Whitmore smiled. "Polite as ever, I heard there was a misunderstanding about some old documents." Camille pushed Noah's affidavit toward him. Whitmore looked down. A second? 2 seconds. Then he looked up. The smile gone. "Oh, that," Camille said bluntly. "Why did you order the deletion of the Airfield 22B report?" Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together, his voice low. "Camille, you are too young in the industry to understand. There are things that cannot be left out. One false report can destroy many careers." Camille asked again. False or inconvenient, Whitmore emphasized each word. Untrue. Camille shook her head. "Witnesses confirm Reddick mishandled the situation. The report makes that clear." Whitmore narrowed his eyes slightly. "Do you believe in a report? Or in someone who has dedicated 30 years?" Camille was silent. She knew Whitmore was trying to spin the conversation around experience, a tactic common in old culture. Mark interjected. "Harold, who are you doing this to protect?" Whitmore looked at Mark, then back at Camille. "To protect North Star," Camille asked immediately. "Or to protect yourself?" Whitmore's breath stopped for a beat. Just a beat. But enough for her to notice. She continued. "You instructed a captain to blame another employee. You erased evidence. And you allowed someone like Reddick to continue working with passengers for 10 years. Whitmore's voice became tense. It was all a necessary decision to keep the company from collapsing. Camille stood up and took a step toward the head of the table. And as a result, North Star became a place where toxicity existed as a tradition. Whitmore slammed his hand on the table. "I did it to keep the company alive, and you've only been CEO for how long? 3 days you think you know North Star better than me?" Camille did not back down. She looked straight at him, her eyes not angry, but determined. "No, I don't understand North Star any better than you. I just understand what's right better than what's familiar. The room was silent. Camille continued, I am not bound by 10 years of compromise, not shaped by fear of union, not influenced by the old culture. She said the last sentence as a declaration I'm here to fix. Not to continue. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. In his eyes, there was a bit of anger, a bit of contempt, and something like fear. Then he laughed softly. You think you can change an entire organization with just a few words and a report, Camille replied. No, I don't think so. She opened her laptop and turned the screen up. Hundreds of comments from passengers, viral videos with millions of views, thank you emails from employees, new complaints from pilots and flight attendants who worked with Reddick. Camille said softly, I have North Star finally spoken. Whitmore was silent. Mark concluded Harold Whitmore. The board has decided to suspend him immediately. An internal investigation will begin today. Whitmore stood up. Put away the documents, his eyes cold. You guys are destroying this company. Camille replied softly. We're saving it. He left, without looking back. A week later, North Star held a company-wide meeting at its Chicago headquarters. Camille stepped onto the stage. No flashy backdrop, no lighting effects, just a CEO standing before a tired crowd. She said North Star has carried many burdens, hidden things, things no one dares to speak of. But from today, we are different. No one said anything. Everyone listened. Camille continued. We cannot change the past, but we can make sure the past does not continue to dictate the future. She looked out into the hall. North Star is not a company name. It is the direction we fly, up, and now. It is time to take off again. The hall erupted in applause. Applause not for a CEO, but for hope. Another afternoon, another door. Camille sat in her new office. She opened her end-of-day email. There was a letter from Daniel Young, who had witnessed everything that morning. The content is just Camille. Thank you for doing what we have waited years for. She smiled. Her eyes stung a little, but not from sadness, but for a simple reason. Finally, she felt like she wasn't alone. She looked out the window where the golden afternoon light covered the city, and she knew the journey was long, but hope had begun. And for the first time since becoming CEO, Camille felt her heart lighten. North Star will change. She believes it, and this time, no one can stop it. Camille Hart's story is not simply a sweet revenge on an arrogant pilot. It is a profound reminder that every human being, regardless of status or skin color, deserves the same respect. We live in a world where prejudice is sometimes hidden behind polite smiles or internal procedures. And sometimes, the most painful thing is not the overt offense, but the silence of those who witness it. Camille did not choose the path of revenge. She chose the path of truth, of changing the system, and of opening up hope for those who will come after her. This story reminds each of us, especially those who have experienced injustice in life, that dignity cannot be taken away. It can only be tested. And it also reminds us that no matter what age you are, it's never too late to speak up. Stand up for what's right, or be someone the next generation can be proud of. The ultimate message is simple. Change begins with one person saying enough, and hope always begins with a heart that refuses to give up. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you feel inspired or see yourself in Camille's journey, please like, share, and subscribe so I can continue to bring you more human and empowering stories. Your support is what keeps the healing stories alive.